Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of the Indian Wells review podcasts. My name is Sander Vika here at the Restrung podcast. We have our first 4 quarterfinalists and eagerly await the second half of our Indian Wells men's quarterfinalists. We thought it was a good opportunity to look at that bottom half of the draw with the number 2 and number 4 seeds with Yannick Sinner and Zverev. And one of the reasons is we had quite a good lineup we had quite a star-studded lineup for the first round of 16 matches, and they certainly didn't disappoint. And having said that, that's even with 3 of the 4 matches only going to 2 sets as opposed to the distance of 3. And let's start with the first and the big, perhaps the most anticipated match of the tournament so far, and that was João Fonseca, the youngster from Brazil, taking on Yannick Sinner, who now it's almost weird thinking of Yannick Sinner as the number 2 player in the world just because he's been so consistent and he just seems nigh on invincible on hard courts. However, I think the reason why it was such an eagerly anticipated match is simply because João Fonseca hasn't really played the biggest names of the sport yet. He's played a few bigger names, a few seeds. He obviously played a few bigger names in his run in Basel last year. But really, it was the first real time that he was going to go up against the biggest stars of the game. And of course, really, if you're looking for in terms of consistency on a hard court over the past 2 or so years, your big test was going to be Yannick Sinner. And even though he lost in straight sets, there were 2 very closely contested tie breaks. And not just that, but he obviously was a breakdown in final set, in that second set. It was obviously a break. He obviously had to reclaim that break in the final set, which could have made it a much more straightforward contest between the 2. But this is the kind of match, a kind of performance that really starts to raise his stock more than just about anything else that he's done so far in his career. And that might be strange because it's a round of 16 loss against Yannick Sinner in 2 sets. However, he had what? Was it 2 or 3 set points in that first set? He was down a break in the second set, clawed that back. And that's the sort of stuff that you build on as a player. And it's the sort of stuff that if you can exhibit, it's one thing exhibiting it against the number 20 in the world, hell, even the number 10 in the world. But when you can do that against who was number 1 in the world for almost 2 years up until the other week, and likely will reclaim that in the coming months, that shows the kind of material that you need and the kind of material that you want to see out of a youngster if you're trying to pick and anticipate the next top 5 player in the world. And equally so, we know that Fonseca's forehand is one of the biggest already on tour, one of the biggest weapons. However, it's the ability that he's started to show now over the past couple of weeks, past couple of tournaments even, the qualities of not just being one-dimensional. Because if there has been a criticism, it has been that forehand. Right? Once that weapon isn't working on a specific day, what else is there? And there hasn't been a lot. But obviously against someone like Yannick Sinner, who you're not just always going to be able to tee off on, it's scrambling, it's showing fight and resilience within the rallies to try and get to that opportunity to hit one of those big forehands. And it's by that you add components to your game that makes you ultimately much more resilient and much more well-rounded as a player. And those are the sort of things that Fonseca, in addition to losing in 2 close tie breaks, will take heart from going forward as he tries to get closer and closer to this sort of stage. Something else that Fonseca will very much take heart from is he actually won more of the longer rallies. Anything that was 5 rallies, 5 shots or more, he won almost close to two-thirds of against one of the best ralliers in the world, if not the best rallier. And it's fun to see. It's fun to see these players, these young players, try and prove themselves, especially on the lesser favored surface. Right? Very much a clay court player, South American, and that's what's exciting to see. If you're Sinner, again, a very business-like performance from him. Maybe not always at the very top of his level. Served sub 60% first serves for the match, but won 86% of those first serves, which is obviously very, very good for him. There was a few very key shots at the end of tie breaks where he just absolutely smashed a couple of returns cross court just inside the line, clean winners, which again just showing some of that clutch when it's needed most. The feeling that I've gotten from Sinner, certainly speaking here on the podcast amongst ourselves, is he hasn't quite reached that level yet. There's something still that he's searching for. He had that unbelievable first match where he dropped one set, but he still seems to be searching a little bit for that confidence, that kind of sereneness that we're so used to seeing. There's still a tiny bit of trepidation, you almost think, or a tiny bit of doubt, which will, again, once he gets potentially into not just the quarterfinal when he plays Lerner Teen, but likely against someone like potentially Alexander Zverev in the semifinals, where that'll start to show whether there's any actual cracks there, or if he's just managing his way through the tournament. And again, don't forget, this is one of these bigger tournaments, right? This is one of the big tournaments. It's almost over 2 weeks, right? It's about 10, 11 days. It's still a major tournament. These Masters 1000 events aren't a walk in the park. You look at the round of 16, there's only 3 unranked players. Looking to some of the other matches, Alexander Zverev, again, you're seeing the product of the adjustments that he's making, the willingness to be more aggressive, to put things on the line. During the broadcast, there's a graphic showing you can see that he's almost 2 meters, consistently 2 meters on average, up into the court more than he was last year on hard court Masters 1000 events. I mean, 2 meters is a massive amount, but it's paying dividends. It's paying dividends because you don't want to be giving away angles and time to someone like Francis Tiafoe, which I thought he did brilliantly not to do. And that forehand, again, just that willingness to tee off and consistently, not just, set something up and hit a big shot. It's the consistently going big. It's not just for the immediate payback against all these opponents. This is almost training and getting yourself into that rhythm of hitting big when you play an Alcaraz, when you play a Sinner, even when you play a Djokovic, because that's what it takes now. That's what it takes now. And the fact that he dispatched Tiafoe 3 and 4 was rather impressive. And again, shows that really where he left off in Australia. The last quarterfinal, which we'll talk about, is Artur Fils. Again, kind of road to recovery, climbing back up. There's the rankings, climbing back up his kind of match preparedness, his match readiness, his groove. And of course, again, someone who favors the clay, but is somehow making it work on hard courts. It'll be very interesting to see how he plays against Sasha Zverev, someone who that top spin and the work on the ball should in theory affect less with how tall he is, and that going more into a strike zone than perhaps someone like Felix, who just a couple of inches shorter might just make all the difference. But again, you grinding it out, using all that to his advantage. And even when he was slightly subpar in that second set after flying through the first set, finding a way to win. finding a way to bail himself out. Drops a couple of games in that second set after having his nose in front. Felix having a chance to push it to a third set, but Fils fighting his way back as we're used to. So a couple of very interesting matches, which we'll cover in a little bit more detail in our next session before all the quarterfinals start coming through. And we'll take this opportunity as well to look at the round of 16 in the top half and who we might think will feature in the quarterfinals in that bracket. And a couple of fantastic matches. I mean, we talked about Fonseca and Sinner being perhaps the most anticipated match, but you gotta say that two equally very interesting matchups. We'll start with the one that's perhaps a little bit slightly more straightforward with Carlos Alcaraz, the number one seed, taking on Casper Ruud. Ruud's been playing some good tennis. He seems to have come through a little bit under the radar, clawed his way back against well-playing Valentin Vachereau, beat Shevchenko. But again, Casper, the professional, making his way into the round of 16 against, someone that he hasn't had that particular success against in the past. And I think a lot of that is they obviously both possess weapons. Casper, massive amounts of spin, able to really generate a lot of work on the ball, which is effective on nearly every surface. Moves well, sets up his shots well. The backhand, always a little bit, again, when your forehand is that good and that big, your backhand's always going to be compared to it. Perhaps not quite up there, but again, is how well can he dictate and how well can he defend once put into difficult positions against Carlos Alcaraz? Can he hit his way out of trouble, which is perhaps one of the most difficult things that you can do against Carlos Alcaraz? And you have to say that it's not likely. It's not likely. As much respect as we here at the podcast and just generally players have on tour for Casper. You have to think that that's going to be a tough task as usual for Casper to find his way through. But I think a good result for him would be to push it to 3 sets. We've seen 1 or 2 dips from Carlos so far this tournament, but he's also been unreal, picking up where he left off, not just in Australia, but particularly in Doha. It's almost like he realizes the potential 40%, 40 to 50% less taxation on his body across a best of 3 setup and just goes even more nuts. It's wonderful to watch because, as now we've said for a few years, people have referred to it as PlayStation tennis, right? He can just keep running. He just keeps getting to every ball. He swings at it, and unlike real world tennis where there's variables, he continues just to hit it and hit it with annihilating speed and power and precision, which again is very, very interesting. So interesting matchup nevertheless coming there. You have to think that Casper will try and emulate Arthur Rindignesh with his first set by grinding it out against Alcaraz and seeing what he can do. And the second, perhaps now at this point, the most interesting and most awaited matchup, certainly from an English perspective, but also because of where we are, because of the history 12 months ago, is Novak Djokovic versus Jack Draper. And Jack Draper, another one of these youngsters who, again, coming back from injury, looking to boost his way back up the rankings. And what better way to do it than somewhere where he has proven to himself that he can reach the very top and win it all. So something that'll be very, very interesting to see. Djokovic, obviously not a completely untroubled path in his way through to the round of 16, but again, has somehow found a way to get here, to get to this point and be in the conversation. And this is right around the time of the tournament where he becomes historically almost invincible. Not necessarily at this tournament, but just overall. When he gets within a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and of course, a final, he becomes nigh on unbeatable to mere mortals in that kind of conversation, in that kind of situation. And if you're Jack Draper, you know, a couple of dips in performance. That second set against Francisco Cerundolo, perhaps not at the lofty standards that his first set was in the round of 32, which that first set was, again, brilliant lefty tennis. Obviously took a little bit to get into that Roberto Bautista Agut match. But again, as we've said, once he gets going, he is one of those few players that you think can genuinely, regularly give Sinner and Alcaraz an extremely difficult time going forward. So we hope to see that match with both players playing very well, because the winner of that will play either Medvedev or Mickelson, which, again, Medvedev, another one of these players, trying to find the answers, slowly building, then gets knocked down a peg, slowly building again. Can he make his way into the quarterfinals where, again, towards the end stages of a tournament, once he has that kind of lockdown mode, he starts to become extremely difficult to beat? Well, that's where we'll leave it for this first review. We'll be back following the conclusion of the top half of the round of 16, where we'll, in a little bit more detail, preview the quarterfinals and look ahead a little bit, get ahead of ourselves as we like to do on this show, and look towards the semifinals. This has been Sander Vika from the Restrung podcast. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.